Sergeant Kian Jamison, a man forged in the crucible of war, lay in his bed at St. Jude's Apex Medical, a prisoner of his own body. Weeks had passed since his chest wound was cleared, yet a silent, agonizing storm raged within him. His heart, the doctors insisted, was sound; his mind, they gently implied, was not. Elite surgeons, baffled by his relentless, unexplainable pain, began whispering of psychological distress, leaving Kian's gaze hollow, filled with a despair that no metal could alleviate. Nurse Drina Petrovic, a quiet rookie whose hands had known the grit of battlefield triage, watched. She felt the sterile air of the trauma center thicken with Kian's unspoken desperation. Here, her intuition, honed in chaos, was considered primitive. But her modest heart throbbed with a different rhythm than the hospital's polished pronouncements. She knew, with a certainty that vibrated through her, that Kian's hidden torment was real, a secret echo only her unconventional wisdom could decode. She had to find it, or he would be lost forever. The pristine corridors of St. Jude's Apex Medical gleamed under the unforgiving fluorescent lights, a testament to its status as a pinnacle of modern medicine. Here, every surface was polished, every machine state-of-the-art, and every doctor a titan in their field. Yet, in room 307, Sergeant Kian Jamison remained a jarring anomaly, a human discord in a symphony of precision. His chest wound, a neat, almost surgical scar now, was declared healed. The bullet, extracted. The scans, pristine. So why did Kian still suffer? Dr. Kazuo Ishikawa, his surgical scrubs immaculate, his gaze sharper than any scalpel, surveyed Kian's chart with a frown that barely creased his brow. Ishikawa was a legend, his hands having defied death countless times. He prided himself on solutions, on tangible results. Kian's persistent, baffling symptoms, the crushing chest pain, the erratic heart palpitations, the pervasive sense of dread, were an affront to his expertise. Sergeant Jamison, Ishikawa began, his voice a cool, measured tone that brooked no argument, your physical markers are excellent. We've run every diagnostic test imaginable. Perhaps, it's time to explore the psychological aspects of your trauma. Beside him, Dr. Amara Okoro, the formidable head of surgery, nodded in agreement. Her presence commanded respect, her judgments rarely questioned. War leaves scars beyond the visible, Sergeant. It's not uncommon for the mind to manifest physical distress even after the body has healed. Her words, intended to soothe, landed like blows on Kian's already fractured spirit. His eyes, once vibrant, now held the dull sheen of a man being told his suffering wasn't real, merely a trick of his own mind. He knew his mind was sound, it was his heart that betrayed him. He could feel it, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, but no one believed him. Drina Petrovic, a shadow against the sterile white walls, watched the exchange unfold. Her modest uniform felt like a disguise among the crisp, confident whites of the elite. She moved quietly, adjusting Kian's foredrip, her fingers brushing his clammy skin. She felt the subtle tremor in his pulse, a rhythm just a beat off, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor that no machine, no lauded surgeon, seemed to register. She remembered the makeshift clinics of her homeland, the raw, unfiltered agony of men whose wounds ran deeper than the surface. She'd learned to listen with more than just her ears, she listened with her gut, with her soul. Later, as Ishikawa and Okoro moved to the next patient, their conversation a hushed, scientific murmur, Drina paused. Dr. Ishikawa, she began, her voice barely a whisper, an almost unheard ripple in the vast expanse of the hospital. Sergeant Jamison, his heart rhythm sometimes feels off. Not irregular on the ECG, but a different kind of tremor. Ishikawa paused, his back to her, and then slowly turned. A polite, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips, the kind that dismissed without words. Nurse Petrovic, he said, his tone devoid of malice but dripping with condescension, our cardiac monitors are exceptionally precise. If there were a tremor, as you put it, it would register. Sergeant Jamison is experiencing post-traumatic stress. It's a complex, but entirely psychological, manifestation. Drina's cheeks flushed. She knew her place. She knew her experience in a war zone, where diagnosis often relied on instinct and crude instruments, held little sway in this temple of advanced diagnostics. But Kian's pain was real. His silent pleas, etched into the lines around his eyes, spoke volumes. She felt his despair like a physical weight. Perhaps, Drina persisted, her voice gaining a fractional strength, the bullet, it was removed, yes, but could a fragment have migrated? Something too small for the standard scans? It was a desperate, unscientific thought, born of 100 harrowing nights in field hospitals. Dr. Okoro, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward, her expression firm. Nurse Petrovic, Sergeant Jamison has undergone multiple, comprehensive scans. CT, MRI, X-rays. Not a speck of foreign material remains. Our imaging capabilities here are unparalleled. We trust our technology and our judgment. Her tone was a definitive closing of the conversation, a clear boundary drawn. Drina retreated, her spirit deflated but her conviction unyielding. They were looking for the obvious, for the wound that screamed. But Kian's wound whispered. She saw the rapid, shallow breaths Kian took when he thought no one was watching, the way he clutched his chest when a sudden noise startled him. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was suffocating not just from pain, but from the crushing burden of being disbelieved. The tension in the room was a tangible thing, a silent battle between cutting-edge certainty and a humble nurse's unsettling intuition. Kian's fate hung precariously, balanced on the scales of arrogance and empathy, and Drina knew, with a rising terror, that time was running out. The sterile air of St. Jude's Apex Medical, usually a balm against the chaos of the outside world, now felt like a suffocating shroud to Drina. Her conversation with Dr. Okoro, punctuated by the head of surgery's icy certainty, echoed in her mind. Dismissed as psychological. Our imaging capabilities. We trust our technology and our judgment. The words weren't just a professional rebuff, they were a death knell for Kian Jamison. The following morning, the inevitable announcement came. Dr. Ishikawa, flanked by Dr. Okoro, addressed Kian with a practiced, almost robotic sympathy. Sergeant Jamison, we've exhausted all diagnostic avenues. Your physical health appears remarkably robust. Given the persistent, atypical nature of your symptoms, we're recommending a transfer to a specialized psychological care facility. Your discharge will be processed by the end of the week. Kian, his face a canvas of quiet despair, nodded slowly, his eyes vacant. The fight had drained from him, leaving behind only the hollow shell of a warrior. Drina watched from the doorway, a tremor running through her. This wasn't robust health, this was a man being told his suffering wasn't real, that his own body was betraying him in a way no scan could capture. The injustice burned. A sharp, visceral memory pierced through Drina's composure, a young boy in a makeshift clinic back home, shrapnel lodged so deeply in his lung tissue it was invisible to their rudimentary X-rays. They dismissed his cough, his lethargy, until one night he'd gasped his last breath. The metallic tang of fear, the heavy scent of antiseptic and futility, it was all back, flooding her senses. Kian was that boy, older, stronger, but just as vulnerable to unseen wounds. She saw the almost imperceptible twitch in Kian's jaw, a muscle tensing as he fought against the tremor in his hands. His heart rate, barely elevated on the monitor, still had an erratic stutter Drina had learned to recognize, a signature of deep distress. It wasn't the frantic arrhythmia of a heart attack, but a subtle, almost melancholic, irregularity, like a drum beating out of sync with its own pulse. She knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that they were making a grave error. Driven by a desperate urgency, Drina approached Dr. Okoro later that day, her voice a low, insistent hum. Dr. Okoro, with all due respect, I've been monitoring Sergeant Jamison closely. His symptoms are escalating, not diminishing. There's a subtle but persistent fluctuation in his rhythm that... Nurse Petrovic, Dr. Okoro cut in, her tone sharp as a scalpel, we have reviewed his telemetry. His cardiac function is stable. What you're observing is likely psychosomatic, a manifestation of his emotional distress, which we are now addressing appropriately. She gestured towards a folder on her desk, thick with reports. Our decision stands. He needs psychological support, not more invasive. But his body language, doctor, his pain is so real, Drina pleaded, her voice cracking slightly. He clutches his chest, he struggles for breath when he thinks no one is looking. It's not just in his mind, it's in his spirit, and it's affecting his heart. Dr. Okoro sighed, her gaze dismissive. Your empathy is commendable, nurse. But we deal in objective data here, not intuition or spirit. Unless you have a concrete, medical observation to report, I suggest you focus on preparing him for transfer. Drina retreated, her hands clenched. Her warnings, her subtle observations, were being swept aside like dust. She felt the heavy cloak of helplessness settle over her. How could she make them see what was invisible to their advanced machines, what only a heart schooled in the brutal intimacy of war could perceive? That afternoon, Kian's condition took a precipitous turn. He was resting, seemingly calm, when suddenly his breathing hitched. A shallow, rattling gasp tore from his throat. His eyes, wide with a silent terror, locked onto Drina. He clutched desperately at his chest, his knuckles white against the pale hospital gown. The monitor, which had placidly displayed stable, now flickered with a brief, alarming dip in oxygen saturation, a spike in heart rate, before correcting itself with an almost defiant smoothness. It was transient, barely a blip, but Drina saw the stark fear in Kian's eyes, the struggle beneath the surface. He wasn't having a panic attack, he was fighting for air, for belief. This wasn't just atypical anymore. This was a man dying by inches, gasping silently for help while the most brilliant minds in the hospital looked straight through him. The memory of the boy, gasping his last, flashed again. Drina's blood ran cold. The thought of Kian being discharged, left to suffocate in silence, was unconscionable. The professional risk of challenging her superiors was immense, but the human cost of her silence was unfathomable. Time was a luxury Kian no longer had. She had to act. Drina's courage to speak up, even when everyone else dismisses her, truly echoes those moments when we all feel overlooked, don't you think? If you're rooting for the underdog, and love stories where quiet empathy and hidden wisdom triumph, then we'd be absolutely thrilled for you to join our growing global community. Please hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more gripping narratives and better stories to life. Become a part of our journey, we can't wait to share more with you. Thank you for being here. The words she had to act reverberated in Drina's mind like a drumbeat, silencing the cacophony of fear that had been her constant companion. The boy's final gasp, Kian's silent, pleading eyes, these were not specters of the past, but urgent realities in the present. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a counterpoint to the steady, deceptive beep of Kian's monitor. Her palms were slick, her throat dry, but a strange, icy calm settled over her. This wasn't about her career anymore, it was about a life hanging by a thread, a life the medical giants were too blind to see. Dr. Ishikawa and Dr. Okoro were a few feet away, deep in discussion, their backs to Kian's bed, their posture exuding an authority that seemed impenetrable. Drina saw Ishikawa gesture dismissively towards Kian's chart, heard the clipped words, "We've exhausted all avenues, Amara. Psychology is our only remaining, albeit frustrating, hypothesis." Okoro nodded, her brow furrowed in agreement, moving to sign discharge papers. Time was running out. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Drina walked towards them. Each step was a defiance, an earthquake tremor through her carefully constructed humility. She felt the weight of every protocol she was about to shatter, every unspoken rule of the hierarchical hospital structure. Her voice, when it came, was a reedy whisper at first, then gained strength as a desperate conviction seized her. "Dr. Ishikawa." "Dr. Okoro, please, wait." Both surgeons turned, their expressions a blend of irritation and surprise. Ishikawa's gaze was sharp, dissecting. "Nurse Petrovic? Is there an issue with the charting?" His tone was a dismissal, a clear boundary between their intellectual plane and her operational one. Drina swallowed, her eyes flickering to Kian, who had subtly shifted his head towards them, a silent, desperate witness. "It's about Sergeant Jamison," she managed, her voice still a little thin, but unwavering. I believe we are missing something. Ishikawa let out a short, incredulous laugh. Missing something, nurse? We have exhausted every diagnostic tool known to modern medicine. His vitals are stable, his scans clear. What exactly do you suggest we've overlooked? His arms crossed, a clear barrier. Okoro, while less overtly scornful, raised an eyebrow. Dina, we appreciate your diligence, but the medical facts are conclusive. Sergeant Jamison requires psychological intervention, not further invasive diagnostics. This was it. The precipice. Dina's vision blurred for a split second with the stark memory of the Warzone clinic, the chaotic urgency, the lives she'd seen slip away because the obvious wasn't always the truth. But it's not conclusive, not yet, she insisted, her voice gaining a surprising resonance. His heart, it's telling a different story. Ishikawa scoffed, a dark amusement playing on his lips. Are you proposing a mystical diagnosis, nurse? We're surgeons, not soothsayers. But Dina pushed past his scorn, her gaze locking onto Okoro's, seeing in her eyes not just dismissal, but a flicker of the meticulous scientist. No. I mean, not the visible wound, not the scar tissue. But its echo. On his spirit, yes, but also on his rhythm. She leaned in slightly, a desperate urgency in her posture. His heart, it's not just the organ. It's the electrical signals, the subtle fluctuations I've seen that the standard monitors miss. The way he struggles, it's a physical fight, Dr. Okoro. I've seen this before. Bullets, they do strange things. Okoro's expression shifted. She looked from Dina's unwavering, fear-bright eyes to Kian, whose face was now etched with a quiet desperation, almost as if he was silently pleading for Dina to be heard. The monitor, as if on cue, gave another barely perceptible hiccup, a transient dip in oxygen, a sharp, brief spike in heart rate that self-corrected almost immediately, but left a faint, lingering instability on the wave. It was so subtle, so brief, it could be dismissed as artifact. But Dina had seen it before, just moments ago. Okoro, a woman of science, caught it too. She narrowed her eyes at Dina, weighing the raw, unpolished conviction against the impeccable credentials of her colleague. This wasn't a medical hypothesis, it was an intuition forged in a crucible of brutal experience, an empathetic leap. It was unconventional, illogical even, but the sheer force of Dina's belief, combined with Kian's barely contained suffering, chipped away at Okoro's logical fortress. What kind of echo are you suggesting, nurse? Okoro asked, her voice tight, a hint of grudging interest replacing her skepticism. A fragment, Dina said, finding her stride now, the words tumbling out, laced with her hidden expertise. A tiny piece, hidden. Not in the heart muscle itself, but perhaps the pericardium. It could be subtly irritating the electrical pathways, causing symptoms that mimic psychological distress because the direct physical trauma is so minute, so elusive to standard scans. Ishikawa started to interject, but Okoro held up a hand, her gaze still fixed on Dina, then at Kian, who was now watching them with a fragile hope blooming in his eyes. There was a moment of profound silence, heavy with professional risk and human desperation. Okoro was the head of surgery, accustomed to final decisions. She had the power to crush Dina's career with a single dismissive word, or to take a leap of faith. The faint, almost imperceptible tremor on Kian's monitor seemed to be speaking directly to her. Finally, she sighed, a sound that carried the weight of her reluctance. Nurse Petrovic, your hypothesis is unconventional, to say the least. And highly improbable. She paused, a muscle ticking in her jaw. However, Sergeant Jamison's current state is unacceptable. And your conviction is persuasive. She turned to Ishikawa, her voice firm now. Dr. Ishikawa, cancel the discharge. Prepare Sergeant Jamison for a specialized cardiac electrical mapping scan. Full, detailed resolution. I want to see every single millivolt. Her eyes swept back to Dina, a grudging respect dawning. If nothing else, we will definitively rule out even the most outlandish possibilities. Nurse, you will assist personally. Dina felt a sudden, dizzying rush of relief and terror. She had done it. She had defied the giants, risked everything, and a glimmer of hope now shone for Kian. The transformation was instant. From a timid rookie, she had become a conduit for life, her courage carving a new path through the rigid hierarchy of St. Jude's. She was no longer just a nurse, she was a witness, a voice, a force of compassionate conviction. The atmosphere in the specialized cardiac imaging suite was a suffocating blend of sterile air and unspoken tension. Kian Jamison lay on the gurney, his face a canvas of exhaustion and a flicker of the desperate hope Drina had ignited. Wires snaked from his chest, connecting him to the array of screens that would soon betray his hidden torment. Dr. Ishikawa stood with his arms crossed, his posture radiating a mix of skepticism and grudging curiosity. Dr. Okoro, beside him, was a statue of professional detachment, her gaze dissecting Drina with clinical precision. A few residents, drawn by the unusual circumstances of a rookie challenging the Titans, clustered quietly in the background, hushed whispers punctuated by the soft hum of machinery. Drina, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, moved with a surprising, almost unnerving, calm. Her hands, usually hesitant in this elite setting, were steady as she prepped Kian, applying the conductive gel, positioning the high-resolution transducers. She felt the weight of every gaze, the silent judgment, the sheer improbability of her position. Yet, beneath the terror, a strange clarity settled over her. This wasn't about proving herself, it was about Kian. It was about the silent song of his suffering. "We'll begin with the standard 3D electrical mapping," Dr. Petrovic, Dr. Okoro stated, her voice even, though Drina detected a subtle challenge in its tone. "Show us what you're looking for." Drina nodded, her eyes already scanning the baseline readings on the monitor. "Yes, doctor," she murmured, her voice soft but resolute. She adjusted the console, her fingers dancing across the controls with an intuitive grace that belied her self-proclaimed rookie status. The truth was, she had operated similar, though far cruder, equipment in field hospitals, learning to coax secrets from damaged bodies with limited tools. The first images flickered to life on the main screen, a meticulously rendered 3D model of Kian's heart, a complex network of electrical pathways glowing in vibrant blues and greens. Ishikawa leaned forward, his expert eyes scrutinizing every detail. Okoro remained impassive, but Drina felt her intensity. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Drina guided the probe, her movements precise, her gaze fixed on the intricate dance of electrical impulses. The colors pulsed rhythmically, a symphony of life, but seemingly without discord. "Nothing," Ishikawa finally muttered, a note of triumph barely masked by his professional decorum. As expected. The bullet was removed cleanly. Dr. Okoro gave a slow nod, a hint of "I told you so" finally creeping into her expression. The residents exchanged knowing glances. The air grew heavier, the hope Drina had carried beginning to feel like a fragile illusion. But Drina didn't stop. "The wound might be clean, doctor," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "but the echo, the shadow it casts on the rhythm, it can be subtle. It might not be a direct physical obstruction, but a whisper, a slight disruption." She remembered the old village healers, how they'd spoken of the body's hum and how a single discordant note could unravel the whole song. She shifted the focus, zooming in, not on the heart muscle itself, but on the delicate pericardial sac surrounding it, then even further, to the pathways that conducted the electrical signals, the invisible highways of the heart's rhythm. She altered the spectral range, fine-tuned the sensitivity, searching for not just a structural anomaly, but an energetic one. She was looking beyond the obvious, seeking the absence of perfect rhythm, the minute hesitation in the heart song. His symptoms are primarily a mix of severe emotional distress and intermittent cardiac arrhythmias, not outright damage, Drina continued, almost to herself, her eyes glued to the screen. "In the field, we saw fragments, so tiny, almost dust, lodge in the most unexpected places. Not always visible to the eye, but their presence, their energetic footprint, still felt." Ishikawa scoffed, a soft, dismissive sound. "Nurse, we are dealing with high-resolution cardiac imaging, not folklore." Drina ignored him, her brow furrowed in concentration. She moved the probe infinitesimally, her fingers a blur on the controls. The screen remained stubbornly clear, a perfect, healthy heart. Doubt, cold and sharp, pricked at her. Was she wrong? Had her desperate conviction led them all astray? Then, a flicker. It was so subtle, so minute, it could have been a trick of the light, a calibration error. A single point on the pericardial surface, where the elegant, flowing lines of electrical current seemed to stutter, a barely perceptible ripple in the otherwise perfect symphony. It wasn't a gaping hole or a prominent foreign object, it was a ghost in the machine, a whisper of interference. Dina held her breath, her heart hammering. She adjusted the angle, refined the focus, isolating that singular point. The image sharpened, and with terrifying clarity, a minuscule, metallic glint resolved itself on the screen. It was impossibly small, embedded just beneath the serous membrane of the pericardium, nestled against a nerve bundle responsible for part of the heart's electrical conduction. Not in the heart, but beside it, its very presence a discordant note in Kian's body's intricate music. The room fell silent, a breathless hush replacing the earlier murmurs. Ishikawa gasped, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. His face, usually a mask of intellectual superiority, went slack, then contorted into an expression of profound disbelief. His eyes, fixed on the screen, widened, reflecting the impossible truth. Dr. Okoro, usually unflappable, took a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, her hand flying to her mouth. The steely professionalism vanished, replaced by an expression of awe, then dawning realization. Her eyes, meeting Dina's for a fleeting second, held a profound, humbling respect. Kian, who had been watching the screen with the quiet resignation of a man who expected nothing, stiffened. A single tear traced a path down his temple, not of pain, but of profound, overwhelming relief. He wasn't crazy. It wasn't in his head. The hidden enemy had been found. Desperation in the room had vanished, replaced by an urgent, exhilarating hope. The impossible had just happened, etched in light on the screen. The unseen echo had finally found its voice. The air in the operating room, previously thick with a silent, collective tension, now hummed with a different kind of energy, one of urgent, precise purpose. Dr. Ishikawa, stripped of his previous certainty but reborn with a fierce focus, moved with the calibrated grace of a master at his craft. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a solemn determination to rectify what had been missed. He didn't speak, but his swift, deliberate actions, the final prep, the sterile draping, the instruments glinting under the harsh lights, conveyed a singular, resolute command. Dina, scrubbed in his first assist, felt a profound sense of responsibility mixed with an exhilarating clarity. Her place was beside Kian, watching, anticipating, ensuring that every beat of his heart was heard, every subtle shift observed. She was not the surgeon, but she was the guardian of the intuition that had brought them to this critical juncture. As Kian drifted under the gentle hand of anesthesia, Dina kept a reassuring presence at his head, her eyes fixed on the cardiac monitor, tracing the familiar, subtle arrhythmias that had betrayed his hidden torment. Dr. Okoro, standing just beyond the sterile field, observed with an almost clinical intensity that barely masked the profound shift within her. Her initial skepticism had given way to an intellectual curiosity, then outright awe, and now, a deep, professional respect for the quiet nurse who had unveiled the impossible. She watched Ishikawa's gloved hands, steady as steel, navigate the delicate tissues, guided by the precise coordinates the specialized scan had provided. The room held its breath, a collective pause in the face of such delicate precision. Minutes, stretched taut as wire, ticked by. Dina's gaze darted between Ishikawa's focused profile and the rhythmic dance of Kian's heart on the monitor. She could feel the collective will in the room, pushing, urging success. It wasn't just Kian on that table, it was a validation of a different kind of medicine, a testament to the power of unseen observation. Then, a soft, almost imperceptible clink echoed through the hushed space. Ishikawa's hand, momentarily illuminated by the surgical light, withdrew from the incision. Between the tips of his specialized forceps, held aloft like a minuscule trophy, was the culprit, a jagged, dark sliver of metal, no bigger than a grain of rice, yet monumental in its destructive power. He dropped it into a small, sterile tray, the sound a soft, final note in a long, harrowing symphony. The change in the room was immediate, almost visceral. On the cardiac monitor, Kian's previously erratic, anxious rhythm smoothed out, settling into a strong, steady, unwavering beat. The subtle fluctuations that Dina had tracked for weeks vanished, replaced by a calm, reassuring regularity. His blood pressure, which had stubbornly resisted stabilization, began to normalize, his oxygen saturation climbing steadily. But it was the transformation in Kian himself that was truly breathtaking. Even under the lingering haze of anesthesia, the deep lines of pain etched around his eyes seemed to soften, the furrow in his brow relaxing completely. A deep, shuddering sigh escaped his lips, a breath so profound it seemed to pull weeks of anguish from his very core. It was the sound of a spirit released, a body finally finding peace. A powerful wave of relief washed over Dina, so potent it made her knees tremble. Her eyes, usually so composed, welled with unshed tears, not of sadness, but of an overwhelming, triumphant joy. This wasn't just a successful extraction, it was a life given back its vibrancy, a soul returned to peace. Dr. Ishikawa straightened, removing his mask, his face etched with a quiet humility. His gaze, now entirely devoid of his usual detached brilliance, met Dina's. "Petrovic," he said, his voice low, almost reverent, "your insights, they were not just correct. They were truly extraordinary. You saved his life." It was not a question, but an undeniable fact, delivered with a profound respect that needed no further explanation. Dr. Okoro, stepping forward, placed a hand on Dina's shoulder, her touch firm and steady. Her expression was one of profound respect, her eyes holding a dawning recognition. "Indeed, Nurse Petrovic. You heard what we could not. You saw the echo." Her voice, usually so authoritative, was now soft, laced with an admiration that elevated Dina in a way no promotion ever could. As Kian slowly began to stir, his eyes fluttering open, his gaze instinctively sought Dina. A faint, utterly genuine smile touched his lips, a smile of pure, unadulterated gratitude. The hidden enemy was gone. The heart's echo, once a distorted cry of pain, now sang a clear, strong song of triumph, filling the room with the quiet, sacred sound of a life reclaimed. The hushed silence that followed Dr. Okoro's words was not empty, but thick with an unspoken reverence. The surgical team, once a blur of focused efficiency, now stood arrested, their gazes fixed on Dina. The air vibrated with the raw energy of a miracle witnessed, a dogma challenged, and a life unequivocally saved by the most unassuming member of their ranks. Dr. Ishikawa, usually a man of meticulous procedure and precise pronouncements, was visibly altered. He moved closer to Dina, his dark eyes, no longer sharp with surgical focus, now held a deep, reflective gaze that searched her face. "Nurse Petrovic," he began, his voice still low, but now devoid of any lingering pride, I was wrong. Terribly wrong. We relied on the machines, on the visible, and dismissed what you saw. What you felt. How did you know? How did you see something that eluded all of us, even with our most advanced diagnostics?" The question was sincere, a plea for understanding from a surgeon whose world had just been irrevocably shifted. Dina, her face still pale from the intensity of the ordeal, met his gaze without flinching. Her hands, which had just moments ago been steadying surgical instruments, now clasped unconsciously in front of her. "It was not knowing, Dr. Ishikawa," she replied, her voice soft, slightly raspy, "not in the way your machines know. It was seeing the story beneath the skin. In the war zones, where I worked before St. Jude's, we often had nothing but our eyes, our hands, and our intuition. The bullets, the shrapnel, they did not always follow the neat paths in the textbooks. They would ricochet, migrate, settle in the most impossible places, causing symptoms that seemed unrelated, psychological even. We learned to look for the echo, the subtle shift in a patient's breath, the tremor in their voice, the story in their eyes, the unseen ripple effect on their entire being." Her gaze drifted momentarily to Kian, still groggy but breathing easier, his features relaxing into a deep, peaceful sleep. "Sergeant Jamison, his heart was not just a muscle to me. It was a drum, beating out his despair, his fear. And even when the physical wound seemed to heal, that drum still played a broken rhythm. It was a familiar sound to me, a sound of hidden pain, of a body and spirit trying to mend around a persistent, unseen shard. Dr. Okoro nodded slowly, her expression a mix of profound respect and dawning understanding. So, your credentials, Nurse Petrovic, are not just medical degrees on a wall. They are etched from the raw realities of human suffering and resilience. You learn to connect the physical trauma to the emotional landscape in a way our elite training, paradoxically, often teaches us to compartmentalize. The revelation of Dina's past sent a quiet ripple through the room. The residents, who had often seen her as the quiet, unassuming rookie, now looked at her with wide-eyed awe. They had dismissed her accent, her modesty, perhaps even her youth, as signs of inexperience. Now, they saw them as markers of a wisdom forged in fire, a depth of understanding that transcended sterile operating theaters. Indeed, Okoro continued, turning to address the wider team, her voice regaining its authoritative tone, but now imbued with a new humility. This is a stark reminder to all of us. Technology is invaluable, but it cannot replace the human element, the compassionate observation, the courage to listen to what isn't spoken, and to see what isn't overtly visible. Nurse Petrovic did not just identify a migrated bullet, she reconnected us to the fundamental truth of medicine: we heal people, not just their wounds. Dina, though basking in the glow of validation, remained true to her nature. She didn't puff out her chest or revel in the praise. Her gaze returned to Kian, a quiet satisfaction settling in her eyes. "I only did what was necessary," she murmured, her humility as profound as her insight. "Every life is precious. Especially those who have given so much." Her transformation wasn't a sudden burst of ego, but an internal blossoming of quiet confidence. Her voice, once hesitant, now carried the steady cadence of conviction. She hadn't just earned respect, she had earned her place, not as a rookie, but as an indispensable part of St. Jude's, a keeper of a vital, often forgotten, truth. Her spirit, long hidden behind a veil of modesty, now resonated with a quiet power, a beacon of human empathy in the glittering halls of advanced medicine. Kian Jamison's recovery was nothing short of miraculous, a testament not just to Ishikawa's surgical precision but to Dina's unwavering intuition. The very next day, the haunted look in his eyes had receded, replaced by a quiet, dawning peace. The tremors that had plagued him were gone, the faint, erratic skips in his cardiac rhythm now steady and strong. He found himself able to sit up without the crushing fatigue, to breathe without the ghost of an invisible hand pressing on his chest. More profoundly, the gnawing spiritual anguish, the sense of being broken in a way no one understood, had lifted. He felt whole again, his body and spirit reintegrated, a warrior finally at peace with his internal landscape. When Dina visited him, a shy smile gracing her lips, Kian reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "Nurse Petrovic," he began, his voice still a little hoarse, you saved me. Not just my body, but my soul." There was a depth of gratitude in his gaze that transcended mere words, a silent acknowledgement of the empathy that had pierced through the layers of his despair. He had faced countless dangers in combat, but the unseen enemy within had been the most terrifying. Dina had given him back his future, a chance to rebuild a life free from the suffocating burden of his hidden wound. He spoke of visiting his family, of finally being able to look them in the eye without the shadow of his illness. His courage, once channeled into the battlefield, was now redirected towards the quiet, profound act of living. For Dina, the hospital was transformed. She no longer walked the gleaming corridors as an invisible rookie, but as a respected colleague whose quiet observations held undeniable weight. Her humility remained, a bedrock of her character, but it was now imbued with an unshakable confidence. Other nurses sought her out for advice on difficult cases, doctors listened more intently when she spoke, and a quiet buzz followed her, an aura of profound, human wisdom. She hadn't sought fame or glory, but in saving Kian, she had inadvertently carved out a unique and indispensable role for herself at St. Jude's. Her war zone experiences, once a source of quiet resilience, were now openly acknowledged as the forge that had honed her extraordinary diagnostic capabilities. She didn't have to hide her authentic self, it was now celebrated. The change in Dr. Ishikawa was perhaps the most profound among the established elite. The arrogant veneer he had cultivated for years began to crack, revealing a deeper, more reflective man underneath. He was seen more often in patient rooms, not just dictating orders, but listening, truly listening, to their anxieties and subtle complaints. He sought Drina's input on complex cases, not as a formality, but with genuine intellectual curiosity, recognizing that her unique perspective offered a lens he lacked. The incident had taught him a humbling lesson: brilliance, without empathy, could blind even the sharpest mind. He wasn't less brilliant, but he was now more human, his surgical mastery tempered by a newfound appreciation for the nuanced, often unspoken, language of the human body and spirit. He still demanded excellence, but now, he also demanded attentiveness, reminding his residents that sometimes, the most crucial clue was not on a screen, but in a patient's eyes. Dr. Okoro, as head of surgery, embodied a different kind of transformation. Her skepticism had been a shield, a product of years of demanding, high-stakes medical practice where only hard data spoke. But Drina's conviction, and the irrefutable evidence it led to, had forced her to reevaluate her paradigm. She initiated a new interdepartmental review process for chronic, undiagnosed cases, explicitly encouraging a holistic approach that considered patient narratives and subtle physiological markers alongside standard diagnostics. She saw Drina not just as an anomaly, but as a vanguard, a living embodiment of the truth that medicine was as much art as science. Dr. Okoro became a quiet champion for Drina, subtly elevating her position, ensuring her voice was heard in meetings where, previously, a rookie nurse might have been overlooked. Her leadership evolved, becoming more inclusive, more attuned to the diverse forms of intelligence within her team. The Heart's Echo case became a quiet legend within St. Jude's, a touchstone reminding everyone that the most advanced technology was merely an extension of human insight and compassion. It underscored a fundamental truth: true healing demanded not just fixing a broken part, but understanding the intricate symphony of mind, body, and spirit. Kian went on to embrace a life renewed, forever grateful for the woman who looked beyond the obvious. Drina continued her work, her quiet power now a visible force, a beacon of human empathy in the glittering halls of advanced medicine. She had found her place, not by conforming to the system, but by enriching it with her authentic self. Her story was a profound message of hope, that even in the most technologically advanced institutions, the deepest wisdom often resides in the quietest voices, and the ability to see not just the wound, but its echo on the human spirit. The future of medicine, she proved, lay not just in what doctors do, but in how deeply they feel. Drina's journey reminds us that true healing often lies beyond the obvious, in the profound connection between spirit and body, and in the quiet power of a compassionate heart. What hidden wisdom have you discovered by looking deeper, or listening to the echoes of someone's spirit? We hope this tale resonated deeply with you. If it did, please consider subscribing to our channel and joining our global community. Your invaluable support helps us create more profound and inspiring stories like The Heart's Echo. Thank you warmly for watching, for being a vital part of our journey, and for valuing the narratives that remind us of humanity's deepest truths. Together, we can continue to explore the beautiful complexities of life.